Alright, man, and we're back. If you want to go ahead and skip to the main top 10, you can go ahead and look at the timestamps below. The show is on YouTube and Spotify, so if you want to skip the introduction and the rules, you can go ahead and do so. Alright, man, this is my top 10 favorite films of 1956. So what I do every couple of months is that I randomize the years 1930 to the previous year, so right now it would be 1930 to 2021. And the year that's selected, I spend 4 months just watching as much as I can, and from there, counting down my top 10 favorite films. Now, I go, obviously, for favorites. I don't go for any sort of objectivity. I don't really believe in that sort of objectively believing one film is better than the other. So there are films that are more critically acclaimed or maybe more appreciated that won't be on my list, but, you know, I can respect them and appreciate them in certain aspects. But the rules of the list, man. Alright, so when it comes to the years, I always go by the rule of the film has had to have been released publicly that year. So for 1956, it has to have been released to the public in 1956. Now, there was an exception. So, for example, man, Agnes Varda's Le Point Court is listed as 1955, and that's true, but it wasn't released to the public until the following year. So, therefore, it counts as 1956 to me. And as well, I'm going by feature films only, so I think the big omission here on the list would be The Red Balloon, which is about 40 minutes, I believe, and The Red Balloon is absolutely phenomenal, man. Would definitely have made the top 10, and would highly recommend, but I'm only going for feature films here. And when it comes to feature, I would say at least a minimum of an hour 10 or so. I know some people kind of have different definitions of what exactly qualifies. Some people say an hour 20, some people say an hour 10. I go for kind of, essentially, if it was intended to be a feature, over an hour. That's one thing. And at the end of the list, what I do is I randomize the years again, and then in 4 months, do it again for that certain year. I've done 2 previous lists before. I did 1998 and 1958, and those weren't exactly 4 months. I was still kind of figuring it out, but this will definitely be 4 months. So the schedule for upcoming top 10s will always be 1 in March, 1 in July, and 1 in November. So I believe that's all I had to say. And like I said before, I can't stress enough, these are just my favorites, man. I mean, there are films that would probably not be in people's list. I mean, if you listen to my top 10 of 58, The Blob was on that list, which I know probably a lot of people wouldn't consider, but I'm only going for favorites, man. So I've said before, when it comes to ratings and stuff, I don't really, rating a film I don't really think is the best kind of way to assess a film's quality, because there are films that are more well respected and are more loved that I would have lower. That doesn't mean that I'm saying those films are lesser. I'm just saying that, personally speaking, I got a different response out of these other films. So, which I think is important to note, that if you end up at the end when I go through the list, films that are more loved that didn't make the list, or it's kind of so on, I definitely don't want that to be an indication of their lesser quality. I definitely don't want that, or to deter anyone from watching said films. You watch the films you want to watch and get your own response out of it. This is just my opinion, and I hope that, at least above all else, these lists are meant to turn people on to certain films, that classics maybe they haven't seen yet, or films that aren't as talked about that are gems. There's one gem on this list in particular that totally blew me away, that I'm really looking forward to talking about. With that said, however, I think that's all I need to say, so let's get right into the list. Alright, man, so at number 10 was a film that I actually swapped out at the last second. Really thinking about what I got out of this film overall, was one that it really stuck with me. A terrific war film directed by Robert Aldridge. This is Attack.
If I ever lose another man on account of you, just one, you'll never see the States again.
It's court-martial talk, soldier. I got a witness standing right here.
Well, let him hear me too, loud and clear, just so there won't be any misunderstanding. You double-cross me like you did Ingersoll, you play the gutless wonder just once more, and I'll come back and I'll get you, Cooney. I'll shove this grenade down your throat and pull the pin.
Now you got to listen to the cast on this thing. Just listen to this, man. You have Jack Palance, Lee Marvin, Eddie Albert, Robert Strauss, Richard Jekyll. I mean, come on, man. Directed by Robert Aldridge, man. That's just a hell of a cast and crew right there, man. And this was one that when it started out, I initially had thought it was going to go one way, because the opening of this film, man, you have this brigade who are being gunned down, or they're trapped and they need basically backup out there. You have the lead of this crew played by Jack Palance, and he's asking for help from the captain, from Eddie Albert, and Eddie Albert at the last second just totally screws him over and gets his men killed. So you can understand when Jack Palance gets out of this, man, he is totally just infuriated with Eddie Albert, and that comes through with Jack Palance's performance, man. The whole first half of this film, or really I would say even less than the first half, the first act of this film, before the actual proverbial shit hits the fan, you really see just this this tension between them, where Eddie Albert is such a coward, man, as somebody who is not truly experienced with combat on the field, and is somebody who just kind of hides behind others, and is just completely unfit to be in this situation. He realizes that Jack Palance really has it out for him, and Jack Palance's facial expressions in the first half, or before everything kind of happens, is great, man. You can just see the rage in his face, and Jack Palance already is a pretty distinct looking actor, man. You see him in a film and you go, that's Jack Palance right there. But just his reactions when he has to be with Eddie Albert is fantastic. Without giving the entire plot away, essentially Jack Palance is led into another situation where he has to rely on Eddie Albert's help, and from there some real just turmoil and bad things happen, man. This is a film that is so heavy on the characters, man. It's so great, because when I say it's a war film, it's not a grandiose war film. A lot of it takes place in these small kind of claustrophobic areas where they're trapped and they have to rely on these radio communications, man. Lee Marvin as well is in the film, who comes in and out of the film, and he's really great as well, trying to see both sides of the situation on that, and he is just terrific in the film as well. This is a film that is definitely heightened by the by the performances of the characters, man, because especially as it goes on in the second half, when the tensions really start to boil and characters are really starting to get closer to a breaking point, you just feel it, man. The third act of this film, especially where it goes to and the decisions that are made, especially the ending, really stuck with me. It's a film where the violence is very, very matter of fact, and can be very harsh without being exploitive and very grotesque, because there's points towards the end when characters start to go and you really feel it, man. It's very, like I said, matter of fact, and it's not very glamorous, man. At least it's not in a way where the score pumps where a lot of times where, like, say you have a character who is killed and the soundtrack of the film really kind of has to let you know what to feel about that. It's a very smartly written film, and with that said, the film was actually written based off a story, based off a play, I apologize, from Norman Brooks, but the film was written by James Poe, and James Poe, man, is somebody who actually is quite a prolific screenwriter, man. He's done some films I've really enjoyed a lot, like Last Train from Gun Hill, which is a terrific western. He did the Sidney Poitier film that got him his first Oscar, Lilies of the Field. He also wrote They Shoot Horses, Don't They?, which I haven't seen, and even earlier in 1956, he wrote Around the World in 80 Days, and another Robert Aldrich film from the previous year, The Big Knife. This is a guy who's really great with good dialogue, good characters, man. Oh, obviously as well, he's also written Cat in a Hot Tin Roof, based on a play as well. Because even a film like Lilies of the Field, man, which I don't think is like an amazing film or anything like that, but the way he writes his characters makes him so likable and enjoyable that it really kind of makes up for some of the shortcomings that it might have. Attack, man, it's a film that even if you're not a fan of war films, is one that I think anybody can appreciate if you like good dialogue and good characters. I love these kinds of films where when you get to the second half, or you get to a certain point where the characters are just reliant on someone else, or maybe not even someone else, but are reliant on a certain situation from somebody else, and the tensions that arise from that, it just really gets you going, man. I love films and situations like that where they're just completely trapped and you have to wonder yourself what would be done in that situation. A terrific film overall, and one that was a total surprise that I happened to record off TCM. At the time of recording this, the Kino Lorber sale is going on, and this does currently have a Blu-ray from them, so it's probably about $10 or so. If you're willing to take a chance, even if you're not a big fan of war films, this is one that you definitely got to check out, man, if you're a fan of just great performances and great actors, man. Attack. At number 9, the big epic of the year, Cecil B. DeMille's The Ten Commandments.
A shepherd girl. What can she be to you? Unless the desert sun has dulled your senses. Does she grate garlic on her skin? Or is it soft as mine? Are her lips chafed and dry as the desert sand? Or are they moist and red like a pomegranate? Is it the fragrance of myrrh that scents her hair? Or is it the odor of sheep?
There is a beauty beyond the senses, Nefertiri. Beauty like the quiet of green valleys and still waters. Beauty of the spirit that you cannot understand.
Perhaps not. But beauty of the spirit will not free your people, Moses. You will come to me, or they will never leave Egypt.
The fate of Israel is not in your hands, Nefertiri.
Oh, isn't it? Who else can soften Pharaoh's heart? Or harden it?
Yes. You may be the lovely dust through which God will work his purpose.
Another film with a terrific cast, man. Come on, you gotta hear this, man. You have Charlton Heston, Yul Brynner, Ann Baxter, Edward G. Robinson, Vincent Price, let's see, John Derek, man. Man, it's just like phenomenal, man. This is a true epic, man. When people talk about epics, it's not just that a film is very long, which this film is quite lengthy. It's almost 4 hours, but man, it's worth it. This was my second time watching it. I had previously seen it last year in the cinema, and what a terrific experience that was, man. This is a film that is meant to be seen theatrically, so it was interesting watching this at home. I wish I had picked up that 4K. Unfortunately, I had to settle just for a standard HD copy, but man, what a terrific film. I don't know how much I can really get into the plot of this one. I think it's pretty much well known based off the biblical story. Charlton Heston plays Moses, who goes basically from a king to a slave to leading the people out of Egypt. And I'm sorry, I'm not a king, a prince. My apologies. He's raised in royalty, but he realizes that he's not. His parents aren't who they say they are. Or I'm sorry, his ma isn't who she says she is. And he has to kind of come to terms with that. And another film as well is that it's interesting how an epic like this really, the character portrayal of Moses as kind of this indecisive character who is being led by God and doesn't really know his true self, because his whole life has been pretty much a lie at this point. So coming to this point where he's going to listen to the word of God to basically to get these people out of Egypt under the oppressive ruling of Ramses, played by the great Yul Brynner, who is terrific in the film as well, man. There's some great interactions as well with Heston and Brynner, and even when Brynner is off with Ann Baxter, who looks absolutely gorgeous in this film, man. She is beautiful, but terrific as well, man. Let's not say that it's just that she's a beautiful actress. She's also great in the film as well, and she goes through a great character change as well. It's terrific, man. The scale of this film alone is incredible. There are some sequences, man, when you look across and see the amount of extras there. I mean, what was the amount of extras they had in this film? Was like some crazy amount, thousands of thousands. So it's wild that you can have these this grandiose kind of epic like this, but still have these smaller character moments. There's some times in the second half of some sequences with Ramses and Nefertiri, played by Brynner and Baxter, that are actually great, that don't slow down the rest of the film, which is another thing to bring up, that the film is about 3 hours and 40 minutes, but it moves by at a pretty solid pace, man. I think I've mentioned before, it's pretty funny that a lot of these films that are longer, you can see that the script makes up for it, where they're not long for the sake of being long. Now, I know, obviously, in the 20s and 30s and such, oftentimes they would have, or probably actually later than that, 30s and 40s, they would have films that, going to the cinema was a big experience, man. So they're going to keep you there for a while, intermissions and all that, but they utilize it well. It's not just to stretch the length of the film out, because how many films you see that are 70 minutes that feel much longer than they are. But this film, the pace of it is especially great. The film is really divided into two halves. Primarily where the intermission is at, not necessarily when Moses comes to terms with them having to get the slaves out. It's more so about the journey in the second half after the intermission of going across, which is really where a lot of the bigger parts of the film come in. There's tons of just big sequences. There's the big parting of the seas. You see all of the extras, all of the slaves just moving across. I mean, I can't even imagine what the coordination on that was. All the animals, all the kids and all that. It's totally wild, but it makes up for it. Because there are times in the film where the set design as well is really solid, where even though it looks like a set, you can just look at the furnishings in the background, or especially the costume design is phenomenal, man. You look at what Yul Brynner and Anne Baxter are wearing in certain sequences, you just see the little details, the amount of effort that went into this, and it being not only just a great film, is truly remarkable, man. Now, I've never actually seen Cecil B. DeMille's. I keep wanting to say Cecil B. Demented from the John Waters film. I've never seen DeMille's 20s version of the Ten Commandments. That's about 2.5 hours as well. What I've heard is very good too. I'd be very interested to compare the film, not necessarily on the production, because obviously you can't it would be a horribly unfair comparison, but more so about how the story is portrayed there. But Heston is great in the film, man. Heston is an actor who I've always seen play a lot of his roles theatrically. And sometimes it's better than others in terms of his performance, but here especially, it works very well. He's a very theatrical actor, and I think it's kind of made him one of the greats, where he can play it up, but not ruin his performance, Even talking about in 1958, The Big Country, he's playing it big in there as well, but he's very good suited to the material. I think Heston was just such a terrific actor, and that he was able to pull off these, great character actor as well. He's able to pull it off where you could see other actors get that same material and try to play it as he does, and not come out as well. Also, I should say that I think Edward G. Robinson was in Soylent Green as well with Heston, to my knowledge. I've only ever seen that film once, but I love Heston, man. He's one of my favorite actors. Such an interesting guy. And the film is just, if you can hold out and see it theatrically, I think you definitely should. However, I'm sure if you get the 4K of this, I'm sure that looks great as well, But it's kind of hard to beat it theatrically. It's just one of those epics, man, that you just have to see for yourself, man. I think, 56 had a couple of big epics, but this is definitely my favorite overall, and it just holds up so much. With this film still being fresh in my memory, watching it again at home, it still holds up, and I just love this film, man. You gotta check this one out. I think there are so many interesting stories from the Bible that have made for varying quality films, but this is definitely one of the best. If you made a list of the best biblical films, this is just a terrific film, man, that you gotta check out. Just a great film overall. So that is Cecil B. DeMille's The Ten Commandments, coming in at number 9. Number 8. This one was a big blind spot for me, and that's why I love doing these lists, because it gives me the opportunity to fill in the cracks of films that I'd never seen before. A very well-known film, one that I'd never seen, but the classic Don Siegel science fiction horror film, Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
He's been a father to me since I was a baby. Always when he talked to me, there was a special look in his eye. That look's gone.
What about memories? There must be certain things that only you and he would know about.
Oh, there are. I've talked to him about them. He remembers them all down to the last small detail, just like Uncle Ira would. But Miles, there's no emotion. None. Just the pretense of it. The words, gesture, the tone of voice, everything else is the same, but not the feeling. Memories or not, he isn't my Uncle Ira.
Wilma, I'm on your side. My business is people in trouble, and I'm going to find a way to help you. Now, no one could possibly impersonate your Uncle Ira without you or your Aunt Alida or even me seeing a million little differences. I want you to realize that. Think about it. And then you'll know that the trouble is inside you.
Wilma, where are you? Out on the lawn. Say nothing to her.
I had previously only seen the 70s version of this film with Donald Sutherland and Brooke Adams, and that's a terrific film as well, you know. And like when I was talking about with The Blob in 1958 on that episode, I'm way more of a 50s guy than I am an 80s guy. Now, I know the Invasion of the Body Snatchers was the 70s, but my point is that I'm more into this kind of science fiction horror. While the quality does definitely is a little more sporadic than a lot of 80s films, when it comes to sci-fi horror, the 50s is all about where I'm at. And I can't believe it took me this long to see this film. And are you surprised? The film was incredible, man. This film was truly one of the strongest films, the science fiction films, horror films of the 50s, man. I don't think I really need to explain the plot, so I'm really not going to go into it too much. Basically, something's going on where these people are... They look like themselves, they kind of act like themselves, but they're not quite themselves, man. And we have Kevin McCarthy in the lead role. He starts to investigate what's going on. There's a case of these people, a great sequence early on where this young kid is saying that, I think it was his ma, it's not her, man, something is off. And this is a concept that I've always thought was just so fascinating and so scary, man. In terms of if this were to actually happen, it's like I don't even know how you would get through this, because the actions of the people that have taken over, I mean, I'm not going to spoil anything like that, but I think it's pretty well known, but just in case, you know, I'm not going to say anything too revealing, but you see like little ticks that are going on where something is quite off, but it's not noticeable. So how do you even really go about it? You don't really know. I think an updated version of this, more so in the more overt kind of deadly route, would be probably George Romero's The Crazies, in terms of that's a film where you have the people who get infected and they're more murderous, but they're more smart about it. So it's definitely easier to point that out, which is funny because it feels like The Crazies is more of a proper follow-up to this film than that. I mean, The Crazies, must-see film, one of Romero's best. But the 70s Body Snatchers as well is considered one of the best remakes, and for good reason. Now, whether or not you prefer the 50s or 70s one is neither here nor there. I think for one, the 70s one is about 2 hours, I believe. This one is much shorter, at about an hour 20, and it really flows by at a great pace, because this is a film where I think, you know, it's a film that's been so steeped in pop culture that you already know what's going on. At least most of the audience members already know what's going on. You know essentially what this sort of thing is. But it still works in terms of the progression of the story, man. Because we're following the plot through Kevin McCarthy's character. So even though as an audience, we pretty much already know what's going on from just general kind of discussions of the film, it's still fascinating to see how he comes about it. And it's interesting that the flashback method that is used in the film, where at the beginning of the film he's considered crazy and this and that, and we see the build up to that. And I wonder if that's an intentional kind of reference from John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness, the way that film plays out as well. We have Sam Neill at the beginning of that film who's in an institution, and they're saying he's crazy, and then we look back in the events of the film. That could be just kind of a general way to tell a plot, but knowing Carpenter's got to be a big fan of this film, so I wonder if that was intentional or not. But as the film goes on, that sense of paranoia works so well, and we see the escalation of whatever this is start to spread, and we have our two leads, Kevin McCarthy and Dana Winter, who are on the run, and the last act of this film especially, I think, is where it really shines. And it's a film that the plot could have been used in such an uninteresting way. I mean, the thing with a lot of 50 sci-fi films that I see is that the ones that aren't so great usually are ones that have a lot of potential, that have good plots, man, that could be remade. You know, you look at the films that should be remade, and it's those ones that have those great elements but just don't add up. So even though it's funny how, you know, this is a great film that gets remade into another great film, the plot is so strong here, and that the paranoia there is so terrific, man. This is one that I probably don't need to convince a lot of people on, because probably of all the films on my list, this is probably the most well-known, maybe this and another one, but it's just terrific, man. If you're like me and just have been putting this one off, I mean, it's a short film, man. It's only 80 minutes, and I think it's available streaming as well, which is how I No, okay, I didn't watch it streaming, but I think it's on Hulu at the time of recording this. But do yourself a favor, check this one out, man. It's a terrific film that you're not going to regret. Just a great, smart science fiction film. Just loved it, man. Terrific stuff. At number 7, this is Kon Nishikawa's The Burmese Harp. I'm a little embarrassed to say that I'm not familiar with Kon Ishikawa's filmography. I see that he's done a lot of work, and unfortunately I just haven't come across any of it yet, including a remake that he did of his own film in the 80s, which I'm very interested in checking that film out and the comparisons on the storytelling as well. But this one was a total surprise that I had not been familiar with, and I thought was just such a beautiful film. Basically what we have here is that it's in the middle of the war between the Japanese and the British, and it's coming to an end, but it's not looking good for the Japanese. So throughout the film, after a conflict on a hill where one of them needs to surrender, but they won't do it. Without getting too specific into it, I don't want to butcher the plot as is, because it's really not about the plot so much. But basically, we have the soldier played by Soji Yasui, plays Mizushima. And he is caught in a situation where he sort of leaves and becomes a Buddhist, where he is brought in and taken by this other character, takes his robe and starts to wander the countryside, seeing the bodies and the effects of the war. This is a very spiritualistic film, man, and truthfully I don't know a whole lot about Buddhism culture. I'm not really sure about it. But it's not that it's really necessary, because this is a film that's very, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a film that's not about the plot, more so about the character of Mizushima and the war he left behind him, man. Because there comes a point where, the war is done at that point, but he still wanders around. He sort of left this life behind him and the people behind him. And with the title of The Burmese Harp, we have these, I don't know if I forgot if it was one character or multiple characters that play this harp, that it's not just used as a point of soundtrack, but it's also used as certain signal calls, and there's some great sequences in the film that utilizes this. There's a point where they're trapped in this house and they have to use the harp to signal it, and it kind of adds to the overall light effect of the film, where a harp, like a harp in general, is a very I don't even want to say relaxing, but the certain sounds that emanate from it kind of go into a certain feeling, a certain Zen kind of feeling, We watch, which the film is beautifully shot as well. I'm not sure who the DP was on this film, but there are just so many terrific sequences where he's in like this giant open area. There's like one sequence in particular where he's running across this very wet beach, and it looks so great as well. What the film does is that it makes up for, I don't even want to say shortcomings in the war sequences as a negative. I say shortcomings in contrast of the rest of the film, of the exteriors. This is a film that I read that was I just had his name up right here, I apologize, that Ishikawa wanted to shoot in color, which I think would have worked as well, don't get me wrong, but I think the black and white of this film works so well because of the singular image in the film of Mizushima walking down this long road, this kind of barren road, with just the stuff behind him is so powerful and works to the cinematography of the film. It's a visual film that is also heavy on this main character who doesn't have a lot of dialogue at a certain point. It really just kind of follow him around and see what he's doing. Not necessarily that it's all about him. We do cut back here and there to other members of the war, but more so in the second half, when it's really more about him, about his journey, about this inner kind of reflection on his life in the war and how it could have been handled differently, the casualties of his fellow men who died at the hands of just in this unnecessary act. This was a film that I I think back to a film like that I watched for 1958, The Ballad of Narayama, which is a film as well that there are long sequences without dialogue. We're really just getting to the headspace of this protagonist who is really kind of has to be on his own journey. And I find these kind of films more rewarding after multiple viewings, or more rewarding in a spiritual sense, man, because this is a character who doesn't have to say what he's feeling, which is a problem that I think a lot of screenwriters face. I just saw a recent film theatrically, and I won't say the name of the film, but a character is left on their own, and a problem that I had is that character is just multiple times saying what they're feeling, saying what they have to do, and I'm just like, man, we got it, man. How often are you in a situation where you're talking to yourself like that? It just doesn't happen, man. Not too often. And that's why I think the script of this film, based on a novel, by the way, that I'm not familiar with, and the screenwriter, Nadawada, I'm also not familiar with. Truthfully, I'm not really familiar with a lot of the cast and the crew in this, but this left such a big impact and really had me thinking a lot about it after. That it's one that I would love to delve more into the work of the director, Kan Ishikawa. This is a film that I watched on the Criterion channel. I don't know if this has a physical release or not, but one that if you like films, very spiritual films about just singular characters on their own journey, if you like films with beautiful landscapes where characters are just wandering across it to show off the beautiful exteriors, the damp, barren landscapes, this is one that I think is definitely recommended. That won't be for everybody. And when I say it's a war film, I don't want you to get an idea of something like a film I talked about earlier, Attack. Even if you don't like war films, they're not your thing, I think both of these films are so character-driven and are so heavy in that regard that it works so well. This is just a truly beautiful film that, like I was saying before with Invasion of the Body Snatchers, doing these kind of lists really makes me seek these films out. It makes me just that I probably wouldn't have seen until later or not at all. I don't know if I ever would have come across this film or not. I can't say here nor there, but I really just love this film, and one that I think a certain kind of audience is really going to latch onto. This is just such a beautiful film and a high recommendation for sure. Coming in at number 6 is the second in the Apu trilogy, directed by the great Satyajit Ray. This is Aparajito. Aparajito, aka The Unvanquished. Like I said, this is the second in the trilogy with Pather Panchali and Apur Sansar, also known as The World of Apu. And I forgot what Pather Panchali's alternate name is. Doesn't matter. This is a film that's a little tricky to recommend if you haven't seen Pather Panchali, because even though it's true that Satyajit Ray had no intention of making a sequel to that film only after the success that he did, I think emotionally this one will work a lot stronger, because we follow the main character from the last film, Apu, played by two different actors in this one, and actually the actor in this who plays the young version, the actress Pinaki Sengupta, is not the same actor from Pather Panchali, but it doesn't really matter as much. I think it still works on its own. But I was lucky enough, I mentioned it in one of my Cozy Corner of Cinema episodes when I talked about The World of Apu, or Apur Sansar, that I was lucky to see this trilogy theatrically, 1 week after another. So walking into this film, I had such a strong feeling towards Pather Panchali that I really didn't know how I was going to respond to this. And wow, man, I just got such a strong reaction to this film, and really kind of showed me what a master Satyajit Ray was, that Pather Panchali wasn't a one-off. And actually, between you and me, man, don't tell anybody this, but Apur Sansar, the third film, is my favorite of the three. And I don't know if I like this more or less than Pather Panchali, but, which is, it shouldn't even be compared. So there's two different kinds of films, two different production styles overall, but it really just shows, this film especially shows Satyajit Ray's just incredible filmmaking techniques, man. And I have to give a little bit of spoilers to Pather Panchali, so if you really don't want any spoilers, I'm not going to get too in-depth on that, but I do have to kind of talk a little bit about what happened at the end of that film. So if you want to just skip this overall, check these films out. All three are phenomenal. You will not regret watching them, and if you do, let me know so we can talk about it, man. And I'm very interested to see kind of what kind of reactions some people would have to these films, because I think people are going to have very different reactions, which is kind of what I had. But with this film, Apu and his mother are going away because after his father's death, it's really just the two of them. His sister as well passed away in the last film, so it's just the two of them. We see the mother's point of view a lot in this film. I mean, this is the Apu trilogy, but we have the mother played by Karuna Banerjee, who is very protective of Apu. She, who is also the actress from Pather Panchali as well, I should say. But she is very protective of him. Apu is getting older, and we see him as a teenager, played by Samiran Gosal. I apologize if I get these names wrong. You guys know me and foreign names. But we see he wants to kind of go out and start doing his own thing. He wants to, I don't remember if he was going to college or not, or if he was on his way out at that point, but basically he's traveling and starting to see, get more involved with his schooling and his writing and all that, and she doesn't really want to come to terms with that, so we follow as well. I also love a lot of the settings in this film, that we see the different areas that Apu goes into. There's one great shot in particular that's always used for the posters, where he's in the middle of this in this neighborhood that he's just totally on his own for the first real time, kind of left on his own in this unfamiliar setting, and it's great, man. I don't know who the DP was in this film. Probably should look these up before I started the video or the discussions, but just the way that Satyaji Ray films it, it's definitely clear that he got more aware of his directing skills, because there's a lot of shots in this film that are more specific, whereas Pather Panchali has those elements as well, where there are those specific shots that are definitely framed in a way that's great. This film feels a lot more aware, and especially to Apoor Sansar, it feels a lot more aware as well. Where the film really hits for me, and why what I really got so strongly out of this film, is not just the relationship to Apu and his mother, Sabujaya, but in the third act of this film, where that goes to, I can't even tell you what kind of reaction I got out of this film. This is a film that when I walked out of the cinema, I felt such a specific way that I cannot possibly get into without getting into spoilers, but it was just so emotional for me, man, that I when I say emotional, I'm not saying I walked out of the theater crying or anything like that, but there are certain shots that linger on him, and especially his mom, his apprehension towards her, and not for anything specifically, but I guess when I say that, more so that he wants to be independent, and she is kind of realizing that she lost her, he's the only one left. We see her really trying to cling on to him, and he doesn't realize that how many times, when you're a teenager, man, you don't really take into a lot of these things what the people around you do for you and the sacrifices that they make until much later than life. I know I certainly have. It took me a while to kind of realize what I was truly thankful for, and where the film ends, I just couldn't get it out of my head, man. This is a true masterwork of craft, and when the third act happens and we get to the conclusion, what all three of these films have in common is that they have a very powerful conclusion, whether positive or negative. You'll have to see for yourself, but just the way that this film ends really stuck with me. And I had mentioned before that Apoor Sansar, where that film ends, rounding up the trilogy, did make me physically emotional. It left me with tears in my eyes, and I was close to that with this one. It was beautiful. This is a beautiful work that I think truly will not be appreciated as well unless you see Pather Panchali, and while you're at it, go see Apoor Sansar as well. At the time of recording this, Criterion have the 50% off sale, and truly there is no better time to experience this masterwork of films than now by buying that trilogy box set. Now, the 4K restorations of 4K may come. I don't know if it will, but I will happily buy that as well. I don't own the trilogy yet, so I may end up buying just the box set now, but truly a trilogy of films that I just, it's just funny because Satyaji Ray's work was one that I'd always known about, but I wasn't too familiar with. I saw the music room for the 1958 episode, and while it didn't make my top 10, I thought it was a terrific film as well. He also did Devi and what's that film? The Hero, I think he did. I haven't seen those films yet. Both were, I think, released by Criterion, but it was such a phenomenal film, man. One of the most emotional films I saw for this list, man. It really just hit very close, man. I'm repeating myself, but I implore you, please check these films out. You will not regret them. Terrific masterclass of trilogy, man. Aparajito, definitely check this one out. Director Elia Kazan has a phenomenal amount of films under his belt. Classics like Facing the Crowd, A Streetcar Named Desire, and On the Waterfront, just to start. But his 1956 film is at my number 5 spot, and that is Baby Doll.
Would you move your leg?
But it's cool here. Comfortable to sit in. What's this here?
That's my charm bracelet. My daddy gave it to me. Them's the 10 Commandments.
And these here?
My birthdays.
How many charming birthdays have you had?
As many as there are charms on a bracelet.
Mind if I...
Count them.
15, 16, 17, 18, 19.
That's all. I'll be 20 tomorrow. Tomorrow is election day and my birthday and the day that Mr. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected for his first term.
It's a great day for the country for both reasons.
Oh, he was a man to respect.
Well, you're a lady to respect, isn't me?
Me? No. I never got past the 4th grade.
Why'd you quit?
Well, I had a great deal of trouble with long division.
Yeah?
The teacher would send me up to the blackboard to work on a problem in long division. And I would go up to the blackboard and lean my head against it and just cry and cry and cry.
So this might be a wild card for some because I don't really hear this film talked about a whole lot. This is based on I think by a play by Tennessee Williams. I know he wrote the screenplay, man. And this was one that the more I thought about it, man, this is a cool movie. This started off as actually towards the bottom of my list, and the more I've thought about it, the more I'm like, no, I really like this film, man. This is one where it's a great power play between 3 characters. You have Carl Malden, Carol Baker, and Eli Wallach. Great cast. That seems to be the theme of this list so far, these great casts. And this must have been a pretty racy film for the time, man, because we have this character played by Carol Baker, who's the character Baby Doll, who I think she's 19 in the film. That's right, she's 19 turning 20. It's her last day of turning 19, and she is married to this much older man, Archie, played by Carl Malden, and they have a very bad relationship, where Carl Malden is very cruel to her, very mean, but Baby Doll, who is, even though she's 19, she is very childlike. I mean, she sleeps in a crib, and there's a lot of, I'm sure, probably Freudian aspects you can look at that. But Eli Wallach comes into the film in one of the best performances of his career, and they start to form a relationship. He plays a character, Silva, and I say relationship, but it's pretty much one way, where Silva is pretty manipulative in an unconventional way to Baby Doll, where he's not outright saying that he's going to, take over her and stuff, but there are some very uncomfortable sequences where, I mean, she is very young mentally, and not quite like mentally challenged or anything like that, but the way that she goes about herself, she definitely is a very, very uninformed kind of character. There's just some great moments in the film where Silva is really going towards Baby Doll. He's getting very close to her. There's a very strong sexual tension between him to her, and she does, and with her character, you don't know if that sexual intention is back or if she is just purely uncomfortable. He gets very close to her in certain moments, and you feel as an audience like you are stuck in this claustrophobic relationship. He's very touchy towards her, very dominating, and their power play back and forth is so strong. It's no surprise the dialogue in this film, man, is phenomenal. You have Tennessee Williams, one of just the great writers of the 20th century, writing this, and their back and forth is terrific. This is one of Eli Wallach's best film of his career, man. When you jump to one of his great performances as The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, but the more films I've seen of his, I really appreciate him more as an actor. Another film of his that I saw from the 70s called The People Next Door, which is admittedly not a great film, but his role in that film is great. He's a very down-and-out father in that film who's seeing the effects of these drugs are having on his daughter. But he is so menacing in the film, and the whole last act of the film, when it's the three of them, Carl Malden, Carol Baker, and Eli Wallach in their house, the tension is so sharp, you could throw a stick of butter on it and it would cut in half, man. That whole sequence of the film really kind of solidified it for me. There's an underlying uncomfortable sexual tension in the film there's so much to go back to, man, especially with the childlike mentality of Baby Doll to the older, more wise but manipulative Silva. I wonder if, I haven't read any interviews, but I have to wonder if William Friedkin is a fan of this film at all, because this film reminded me a lot of his 2011 terrific film Killer Joe with Matthew McConaughey, where the relationship between Matthew McConaughey and Juno Temple in that film is much in the same way, where Juno Temple as well. Also, these are both Southern kind of films, Southern, I don't even know exactly what part, but that relationship back and forth where Juno Temple's character in that film is very childlike. I think she's younger in that film as well, maybe 16 or so. I don't exactly remember, but it's that same kind of thing, and how that forms as well. That's a different kind of film as well. But also that film feels like a play as well, especially in the last act where you have all the characters in this one location. But Killer Joe as well is a must-see film. That's a very, very strong film. This film I just got so much out of, and where the ending goes, it's the ending, it just nails it, man. This is such a so ahead of its time with the way the characters act off one another, and the underlying idea of this young and old sexual tension that is so I imagine was just so shocking at the time. And apparently this was the film debut of Eli Wallach, which I didn't know, and what a hell of a debut, man. I don't think this is on Blu-ray. I had to rent this film online, but man, and especially with as hot as it is out, I think this is a film that is perfect for this time of the year, a good summer film, and especially it's a film that takes place, I believe, over the course of one day, if I remember correctly, because, I think they say that she was turning 20 the next day, where she's still of age, but there's still that underlying creepiness that works so well. Truly love this film, one of the real gems that I discovered this year, and a must-see, man. Love this film. That is Baby Doll, and it just goes to show how strong of a filmmaker Elia Kazan was. With even a great film like this that I don't hear talked about as much, is still one of his best, man. At number 4, the seminal western of the year and probably of the decade, John Ford's The Searchers.
What do you mean you don't have any blood kin? What, Debbie's your blood kin?
Not no more, she ain't.
Well, you can keep your will. I don't want any of your property. Besides, I ain't forgetting you was getting all set to shoot her yourself. What kind of a man are you anyway?
She's been living with a buck. She's not that
Shut
bad.
your dirty mouth! I hope you die.
That'll be the day.
Another film like this that I'd always heard about, and this was my second time watching it, and the first time I had seen it, man. Like I talked about with Vertigo in the 1958 episode, I think there's an ultimate stigma when it comes to finally seeing a classic that you hadn't seen before. Not just a classic, but a film that's considered to be of a certain status that's untouchable. And when I first saw the film, man, it was obviously great. I couldn't deny that, but it didn't quite hit the place that I think it had intended to for me, for whatever reason it was. So watching it again this time, having the previous knowledge now, it really made me look at this film in a much more appreciative light and seeing just how seminal this film was. Not just for John Wayne, of course, which would be his most famous work, but of John Ford, a filmmaker whose work has kind of led up to this point, and maybe even beyond so to later on with The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. But John Ford was such a seminal director with works of the such like Stagecoach, Young Mr. Lincoln, Rio Grande, a lot of the films where he's really perfecting his art. I mean, a director who is always kind of setting the bar for himself, and these films that are talked about even now. A Stagecoach was one that I hadn't seen until I think last year or 2 years ago, and just seeing a lot of his inventive camera techniques and his camera work showed just what an exceptional filmmaker he was. And The Search is no exception. The camera work in this film was always something that stood out for me, because not necessarily with the way of the movement, but of certain shots, the way that certain scenes are shot. A film like this where you have the hot deserts and then you have scenes that are in the winter. And what's interesting as well is that it's noticeable when it becomes an exterior of these big open landscapes to an obvious set. But the way that John Ford shoots them is so interesting because he still treats it as such, if that makes sense. Like the way, knowing certain exteriors in the foreground and the background, and how he kind of sweeps the camera along, man, kind of on these beautiful tracking shots. It's a little, I may not be explaining myself in the best way, but just his camera work here really stood out to me. John Wayne as well, man. I think this is a film that really kind of, while John Wayne I don't think ever quite got to be such a complex protagonist as maybe some of his formers of the time. You know, I don't think he ever had a role quite as, with the exception of this, maybe as complex as maybe something of Clint Eastwood or Gary Cooper of the such. I think what I like about his character here so much is that he's a character who is filled with total hatred, man, but he still has that John Wayne persona on the front. He's somebody who really hates these Native Americans because of his past with them in a sequence of that has been discussed, but I think says a lot about his character, where they discover a dead Indian, and he shoots the eyes out of both of them, basically. So after this character is dead, if your eyes are shot out, you will no longer be taken to whatever afterlife there is there. You will forever wander in inevitability, or I'm sorry, not inevitability, in uncertainty, never reaching peace. Where he's a character, even in death, he still wants them dead in a way that is so interesting to him as an actor, man, because he is, I think on the surface, it's easy to look at him as such a portrait of what a Western star should be, but I don't think that's the case, man. I think he's definitely a more layered character than just we're going to go on this journey, which the journey, too, by the way, is so interesting as well. This is a journey that takes a long time, where we see the characters gradually age, and characters who come back later in the film, we see them older now. This is an early role for Natalie Wood, who comes into the film later on as an older version of a certain character, and we really feel that sense of journey, man, not just the land, but of time. These characters who are taking this big part of their lives. I should also mention some of the other cast. You have Jeffrey Hunter in the film, Vera Miles, Ward Bond, another film with a great cast as well, and we really start to see this journey they go on, man. We really feel the time pass, and when you get to the ending of the film, the pure exhaustion is inevitable. And the final shot of this film is just one of the most perfect final shots of any film. This is truly a film that smarter men than I could talk about more in depth, and obviously I don't want to be sitting here all day talking about it, but just what the film gave me overall is something that I didn't fully appreciate until this viewing, and I think it's important to see these films again and really get a new perspective on it later in life, because having seen it before and liking it a lot, you know, understanding its reputation and understanding that it's often called the best or one of the best Westerns of all time, I get it, but this time the writing is so strong as well. This is based off a novel written by Frank Nugent, who also wrote maybe he didn't write Stagecoach. I don't think he did. No, he didn't. Okay, I apologize. But either way, terrific film. I think this is one of the films on the list. I don't really need to convince you of its status, of its quality, because it does have this higher echelon of standards that a lot of filmmakers would, you know, play such inspiration from. I mean, Martin Scorsese is a huge fan of this film. I mean, even, you know, you look at Tarantino, who duplicates a shot from Inglourious Basterds going out the doorway, which is just very noticeable, but intentional. It's just a masterclass, man. What can I say about this film? It's sort of like, what can I really talk about here, man? It's a masterclass of John Ford and John Wayne at their heights, and it's a film that John Wayne's not my guy when it comes to Western stars, but this is one of his best films. And that's not to discredit John Wayne. Rio Bravo is definitely a top 3 favorite Western. He's just an actor who maybe I haven't been as much interested as his work in terms of some of his peers, but seeing this film, it really kind of just shows what a light he was, man. What a true film star he is, and John Ford, one of the true filmmakers of the 20th century. The Searchers, undeniable masterpiece. The biggest gem that I found this year, going through many films, films I'd never heard of, films that I maybe knew a little bit about but wasn't too familiar with, this was the one that I knew absolutely nothing about, never heard anyone spoke of it, and it came in at number 3. This film blew me away. This is the Argentinian film Beyond Oblivion, aka Más allá del olvido. I probably butchered that name, but hey, man. This film, wow, man. This is an incredible, incredible film that was one of the first that I watched for the year and has still, that whole time was near the top of the list, man. This is an incredible film that, you can easily find it on YouTube. There are many uploads of this film, but unfortunately is not available on physical media. To my knowledge, there was a VH... Anyways, we'll talk about that in a little bit. But basically, this is an Argentinian film directed by Hugo del Carril, and it's about a man. He's in love with his wife, but she passes away, so he becomes a loner. He becomes totally isolated. But he goes to this club after her death, and he starts to see this other woman there that he starts to kind of tip and starts to be very formal with. And her husband sees this man who is lonely and is giving her good money. And he says, why don't you go with him in a plan to exploit this poor man's death, or poor man's loss, I should say. Because they have an act going on where he will throw knives at her, like at a circus and stuff. And from there we see the relationship between the two leads in this film. We have Laura Hidalgo playing Blanca, and the main actor in the film who plays oh gosh, what's his name I just had here? Who plays Fernando, played by Hugo del Carril. And he was an actor who has done a lot of work, but I'm not familiar with this. Truthfully, I'm not too familiar with a lot of Argentinian cinema, but this was one that the characters are so strongly written, and when it's a film that it's not a very long film, but the build up of it works so much because the whole first half is really the build up between the lead here and his I'm sorry, not between the lead, of the lead and his relationship to these two women, his wife who has passed away and this new woman who works in the club. Fernando's a very interesting character, and he's one who goes through long sequences without any dialogue. He wanders the streets in this nice attire where we see that he's obviously well off, but he has all this money but nothing to do with, no one to truly love. That sense of loss is totally in him, that he cannot see anyone else. He's become a drifter, a loner in his own life. So you can't blame him for when he starts to see this other woman who initially does not have really any interest in him. He waits for her after the club, and he wants to be friendly with her. And she kind of just doesn't really think much of him. It's the husband who's conniving. But she's bad as well because they get to such a close point of romanticism, it being totally one-sided. And that's what leads into the second half of the film, which is as strong, where we're not going to give everything away, but they become very close. Well, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. He becomes very close to her, and it's still one-sided. We see that people around him start to see her for who she truly is, and the manipulation that she's doing onto him, the extraction of wealth that she's taking from him, being very disrespectful to the people around, and the inevitable downfall. And basically, like Baby Doll as well, it becomes kind of a three-way problem with these three. The actor who plays the husband, he is a name I just had up, whose name I can't remember right now. I apologize. It may not even be Hugo del Carril. It's kind of tricky to I may have gotten the name wrong, so I do apologize. But either way, what I was saying before is that the interesting dynamics that come through with it is great because I think of the big comparison of the film would be Vertigo a couple years later, and whether it was intentional or not, I don't know. I won't give away the connection there, but there was one big plot point that is directly, it's the same exact thing from Vertigo, but it works so well because both of these films are a character who's dealing with a certain obsession in a way, and it's one-sided. In Vertigo, it's a little more what's what I'm looking for? It's a little, I don't even want to say sinister in a negative way, because with James Stewart's character in that film, it's more of a there's more going on in that character. I'm not explaining myself well, but the relationship here is very interesting because the lead in this film feels a little more human, where we can side with him and we can see where he's coming from in terms of the betrayal of both of their parts, of the husband and wife. And it's great, man, because when it comes to the conclusion of the film, where everything is kind of brought to the surface, it's great and it's tragic and ties it all together. The writing in this film is so strong, man. This is written by let's see, got two here by Jorge Rodenbach and Eduardo Borras. And I apologize if I got those names wrong as well. But the pacing of the film from their writing is so great, because we really start to feel the build-up in the first half of that loneliness kind of creeping in, and that release when he meets this other character, man. It works so well, and it moves along at such a good pace that I just found myself totally invested. This is a true gem, man. This should be in the Criterion Collection. This should have a physical release. This should have something, man. It's just wild when a film like this that is so good doesn't have as a traditional release, because I don't know if a lot of people are apprehensive about watching stuff on YouTube or anything like that, or watching stuff online, but sometimes, man, you just gotta do what you gotta do, and it's a shame, and I really hope that someone can put this out. I don't know, maybe it's a right thing, or maybe no one knows about it. I don't know. I looked it up, and I think you can get a burn-on-demand bootleg of it, and I just hope that more people seek this one out, man. This film is too good to be forgotten and really deserves the credit that it properly needs. So that is Beyond Oblivion. All right, man. At number 2, we have Robert Bresson's A Man Escaped.
C'est l'histoire de cet exploit unique que raconte le nouveau film de Robert Bresson. D'un côté, des murs, des barreaux, des soldats, des armes. De l'autre, un homme seul, désarmé, battu d'avance.
Bresson's a filmmaker whose work I'm familiar with, but haven't seen a whole lot of his films, man. The only other film of his that I've seen is Mouchette, and that was one of the best films I'd seen last year, but I know he's done a bunch of other films, Pickpocket, Alcazar Balthazar, Four Nights for Dreamers, done a lot of stuff, man. But this was one that he's 2 for 2 for me right now, because I love Mouchette and I love this film as well. Prison escape films in general are totally my thing, which is funny because I'm not a big fan of prison films for whatever reason. But this was one that totally just captivated me, man. Captivated, not incaptivated. Apologies there. This is based off a true story of this guy, Lieutenant Fontaine, who is put into a Nazi prison. And the whole film is about his escape, the trials that he goes through, realizing that he is going to be either in there forever or is going to be put to death, the escalation there, and the time running out. Along the way, we meet a couple other characters. At a certain point, he gets another cellmate, and they have to devise a plan to get out of there. And this film is based on a true story, apparently so much so that Bresson really did not want to stray at all from the facts, so we're being presented here with how it actually went about. The memoir was written by André Davigny, and this film is very light on dialogue in terms of the characters speaking to one another, but it's almost entirely narration, almost entirely to my knowledge. There's a lot of sequences in the film that the way Bresson directs it, the unfolding of certain events, anyone else could have directed it in a monotone, sort of redundant manner. But the way that he directs it here is so fascinating because he makes little events such as the way that, also the lead is played by Francois Leteux, and the way that he does it is when he's just doing simple tasks like unhinging the boards and how he has to put them back together, or getting rid of some of the wood chips there, how he has to build a rope. It's sequences that on paper wouldn't be as interesting, but the way that Bresson directs it, with almost no soundtrack to my knowledge, at least I don't remember any soundtrack to this. It's all external diegetic sounds, and you hear oftentimes gunfire in the background, or other sounds going on. The sound design especially is what really stands out, how the film makes good use of silence, where silence can be broken by something as little as maybe footsteps in the distance, or maybe something approaching. That sort of puts a whole new tension on the sequence, and the escalation as well when we get to the actual escape, which, this was based off a memoir, so as an audience member we know essentially what happens, but we don't know what happens to these other characters. And also what Bresson does, which is so great for a film like this, is that even though we know the outcome, there is still that tension there. I don't know what happened to this guy afterwards, but at least in this situation, when we get to the conclusion of the film, it feels still as such a as something like a weight off your shoulder, where you knew it was going to reach a certain conclusion, but the steps getting there make it all that worth it. And I really like with the end of the film as well, that it really doesn't linger on. It sort of just ends where it needs to. I love a film like The Great Escape, but I always felt like, an opinion that I've always had is that I always felt like you didn't, like a big portion of that film in the third act, you really could have been left out, because essentially the story is about the escape. That's what it is. But as it goes along, seeing the techniques that he has to do, the problems that he gets along the way, the issues that always come along the way, because there's no such thing as a smooth escape. There's always going to be problems, man. There's always going to be that risk, and it's just so great to watch this unfold, man. It's such an engaging film as well. I think this is a film that, even without the narration, which is not a case where it ruins the experience, where, as I mentioned earlier, where a character is by themselves, it works regardless, but in reference to something I was talking about earlier, with the character talking to themselves, is that for one, he can't say it out loud, which thankfully he doesn't. It wouldn't even make sense for him to do. But a narration kind of works with filling that gaps if you really wanted to. I'd be interested to see this without a narration, but it still doesn't negate from the film at all. Yeah, man, just terrific escape film. It takes its time, but it's never boring. And the conclusion, man, it's just a masterwork, man. Bresson, really, the more work that I've seen of his, it makes me want to see more and more of his. And just the two films that I've seen, just very interesting filmmaker, and what he's put out, man, I just really am on board with. He's definitely a filmmaker that I'm really interested to see more of his work. So, A Man Escaped. I believe this has a Criterion Blue. I don't actually know. I watched this on the Criterion channel, but one to definitely check out, man. Just a really terrific film. Number one, man. My number one favorite film of 1956. Wow, man. Truly, wow. A film by a master, an undeniable masterpiece, and my first time watch, Stanley Kubrick's The Killing.
You mean there's going to be two other guys in on the deal, and we ain't going to know who they are?
That's right. You don't know who they are, and they don't know who you are. That makes sense to you, doesn't it?
Well, yes, I guess so, but
Makes sense to me, all right. How come we need them, though, Johnny? What are they going to do?
Oh, one of them's for the job with a rifle. None of you boys can handle that, even if you were willing to. And the other one starts the fight in the bar.
These other fellas, how much are they cutting in for? Not that I mind. Anything you do is okay, but...
These men are not going to be in on the basic scheme. They're getting paid to perform certain definite duties at a certain definite time. And they're not cutting in on the take. They'll be paid a flat price to do a straight job.
Well, if they don't know anything about the basic plan, about the job, then why are they doing it?
That's simple. These boys are straight hoods. They get paid in advance. $5,000 for the one with the rifle and $2,500 for the other.
Well, where's this money coming from?
That's where Marvin comes in. He's getting the $7,500 for us, and he gets it back off the top.
I wish I could do more, Johnny. It's almost not right for me to get as much as everybody else. After all I do is...
Your money counts for plenty, Marv. You don't hear any of them complaining, do you?
Sure. You're okay in our book, Marv.
But look, Johnny, if these two hoods get paid in advance, how do you know they're going to do their jobs?
I'll vouch for them. These guys are pros. They can't afford to weasel out on a deal. If they did, they'd be washed up. Okay?
Okay.
Any other questions?
Now, Stanley Kubrick made previous films before this, man. He did Fear and Desire and Killer's Kiss. Killer's Kiss is actually a film I like a lot. I haven't seen Fear and Desire, but I know Kubrick is very much not a fan of that film. So I think it's fair to say that in terms of the Kubrick that we would know from here on out, The Killing feels like the real first Kubrick film. And my gosh, man, what a film to start out with. I don't know, where do I even begin with this film? So The Killing is a heist film, one of my favorite kinds of films, man. We have Johnny Clay, played by the great Sterling Hayden, who has come up a number of times in the show, whether we're talking about The Godfather or Terror in a Texas Town or anything of the such. But he plays an ex-con who wants to steal $2 million from this racetrack. And along the way, we have these other characters that come into it, man. We have some of the other characters like Elisha Cook Jr. And him and his, the relationship with his wife we'll get into later. We have all those other characters who all either work at the racetrack or get involved in some way, and we see this heist plan and how it all unfolds in a bad way, man. It's a film where there's so many different characters to do this one task, but watching it all kind of fall together in a negative way is so interesting, man. Because it's a film where the heist is planned, man. It all works out if everything goes right. But really, once the money is taken, that's where it all goes wrong, man. What I was saying before is that the relationship between Elisha Cook Jr.'s character, George, and his wife, Sherry, played by Marie Windsor, their relationship is so good. We start to see the trouble between them and how that ends up at the end of the film. And also the way the film is told is at times non-linear, and it's interesting to read that originally it was received negatively for that way, so in a re-edit that was told in a linear fashion, it was received even worse. So they ended up keeping Kubrick's original intention of the film, and it works out very well, because at a certain point after everything is said and done, we realize what's going on, we still have that last act to deal with, the actual getting away with it all, and that is some of the strongest stuff in the film, man. The third act in this film, when we're up to date, the tension in that is so sharp, man, because we start to see the panic, everything is starting to close in, what's going to happen, and you just start to feel it more and more building up, the true anxiety of the whole situation. And then when we get to the final 5 minutes of the film, I mean, man, I tell you, there's one shot at the end of this film that says it all, man. I'm not even gonna lie when I tell you that I actually noticeably gasped out loud, because I was so surprised and shocked that it went this way, where I was just like, man, the way that Kubrick directs it, the way that he pulls back and we see the whole action, it makes the whole film worth it, man. I love these kinds of films when everything kind of just goes wrong, because the thing is that it's not even that the robbery itself goes all that bad. It's just the outcome of that all. We start to see the characters turn on each other. We see the violence, which is another thing to mention as well. The violence in the film, this was definitely, I think, a turning point from the mid-50s, where we're getting violent films that were not necessarily gory or grotesque, but were more calculated and brutal. I look at another film like, oh gosh, what was the name of that film? I just watched a little bit ago. It was The Last Wagon. That's what it was. Where the violence in that film is pretty brutal, man. There's a lot of abrasive stabbings, and the character gets a tomahawk to the head at one point, and it's not gory, but it's shocking. Where you figured a film like that would be more pulled back, but Kubrick doesn't hold back, man. It feels very honest. There's a point later on where a character is killed pretty closely with a gun, and it's shocking as well. The whole film, it's a constant build, man. It's only about an 80 minutes or so, but Kubrick wastes no time. Or maybe, an hour and 24. It just constantly is moving and has this energy and excitement that just works so well, and it just never stops, man. It builds and builds and builds, and then finally when we reach a certain point, when the anvil is dropped off of our shoulders or dropped off our backs, you really just feel like, wow, man. When the credits come up on this and you realize that everything you just saw was so perfectly constructed, you think, truly a master made this film, and a master did, man. Undeniably the best film of the year, in my opinion, The Killing. Just a total masterpiece, and my favorite film of 1956. So, that was my top 10, and like we always do, we're going to go through all of the films I saw, the rankings, just from my least favorite to my favorite, and then we'll do the randomizer. So, my least favorite film that I watched of the year is Toto, Peppino, and the Hussy, coming in at number 69. Number 68, High Society. Number 67, The Lieutenant Wore Skirts. Number 66, Full of Life. Number 65, Yield to the Night. Number 64, Slightly Scarlet. Number 63, Goodbye, My Lady. Number 62, The Solid Gold Cadillac. 61, Indestructible Man. 60, The Revolt of Mamie Stover. 59, Around the World in 80 Days. 58, The Bad Seed. 57, A Kiss Before Dying. 56, Bundle of Joy. 55, Back from Eternity. 54, Written on the Wind. 53, Bob the Gambler. 52, Plucking the Daisy. 51, The Catered Affair. And 50, The Intruder. 49, Elena and Her Men. 48, Nightfall. 47, Beyond a Reasonable Doubt. 46, Serenade. 45, Moby Dick. 44, Death in the Garden. 43, The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit. 42, I Will Buy You. 41, Flowing. And 40, Friendly Persuasion. 39, Patterns. 38, The Mystery of Picasso. 37, The Violent Years. 36, The Killer is Loose. 35, And God Created Woman. 34, The Wrong Man. 33, Love Me Tender. 32, Stranger at My Door. 31, Bigger Than Life. And 30, Autumn Leaves. 29, The Last Wagon. 28, Crazed Fruit. 27, Jubal. 26, Gun the Man Down. 25, Farewell to Dream. 24, The Man Who Knew Too Much. 23, 23 Paces to Baker Street. 22, La Pointe Courte. 21, Tea and Sympathy. And 20, Ransom. 19, While the City Sleeps. 18, Forbidden Planet. Forbidden Planet. I don't know why I said that word. 17, Giant. 16, 1984. 15, Early Spring. 14, Spring on Zarinasha Street. 13, Street of Shame. 12, The Harder They Fall. And 11, just barely missing out, and what I changed at the last second, Somebody Up There Likes Me. Now for my top 10 once again. Number 10, Attack. Number 9, The Ten Commandments. Number 8, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Number 7, The Burmese Harp. Number 6, Aparajito. 5, Baby Doll. Number 4, The Searchers. Number 3, Beyond Oblivion. Number 2, A Man Escaped. And number 1, The Killing. So now it's that time again to randomize the years 1930 to 2021, excluding 1956, 1958, and 2021. So drum roll, please. Thank you, man. So the next top 10 year will be 2018, a very recent year, but man, there were some great films that year. So come back in November and we're going to do my top 10 favorite films of 2018. I hope you guys have enjoyed this. These are always so much fun to do, and I hope that I turned you on to some great films that I think you're going to enjoy a lot. All the best. See you next time.